Lyddon. I'm the founder of Sensory Spectacle, and we're doing a session today all about sensory processing difficulties. So it's called Becoming a Sensory Detective. I'm going to give you some information, some insights, some research, as well as strategies that we can use in order to become that sensory detective ourselves. So, like I said, I am the founder of Sensory Spectacle. We educate about and create awareness of sensory processing difficulties. So head to our website to find out more about that. There's lots of downloads, free information, as well as resources that you can buy to enhance your knowledge and understanding even more. You can email us as well at any time with any questions, hello@sensoryspectacle.co.uk, and you can also interact with us on any of our social media pages. So we'll see you there. So let's get going. Welcome. Now, the first thing I like to share whenever I do training is that sensory processing difficulties impacts a large range of people. It may well be someone with an additional need, it may well be someone with a learning difficulty, it may not. And so it's really important to remember that research says that sensory processing difficulties impact 1 in 20 people. Now, if you just think about a family get-together or a classroom, it's highly likely to be more than 20 people that come into that party or into your classroom. And so therefore, there's likely to be at least one person who may well organise their sensory information in a slightly different way. So they may be more sensitive to sound, they may be more sensitive to certain visual input. As we go through today's session, it doesn't mean you have sensory processing difficulties if you can relate to some of these things that I'm talking about. Many of the things that I'm talking about also relate to our sensory development. And we are all sensory beings. We all learn and rely on the information received from our senses to understand the world around us. So yes, you may well be sensitive to certain sound, or you may well have a particular preference to a smell or a food. However, for people with sensory processing difficulties, largely in this workshop, we're talking about the people who require a level of support in order to understand the world around them and to engage in it. So we might be talking about people who fidget quite a lot. Maybe they find it difficult to engage in an activity because they're fidgeting. We may well be talking about people that lick objects and they're licking things because maybe they're getting some sort of smell or taste or texture from it. We may well be talking about people who walk on their tiptoes, and that can be for lots of different sensory and body awareness inputs. We're talking about people who might break things easily, so they might squeeze things, they might throw things, and when they do that, they might use a bit more force than you and I may recognise that we need to use for that. It may well be when they're writing, they break pencil nibs quite easily because actually the force and pressure that they're using when they're writing is more, and so they prefer to use a pen. And it may well be labels, seams that become really itchy, really annoying. And so you might notice that some people take their clothes off, they only wear certain types of clothing, or maybe they wear it inside out. So if you notice any of these characteristics and more, we may well be talking about some signs that can relate to sensory processing difficulties. Okay. So in order for us to understand SPD a little bit better, we need to understand our senses, and our senses is something that we can all relate to. Like I said, we all rely on our senses to understand the world around us. So let's have a little think. How many senses have we got? Not a trick question. Question that I ask in all of my workshops. Gets us thinking, you know what? Yes, there's 5. There's the 5 that I'm taught at school. Smell, taste, touch, sight and hearing. 5. And that's right, there are 5. Those 5 senses are external senses. And what we mean by that is all of the information comes from outside of our body and feeds inside our body. So when I hear something, sound enters my ear. When I see something, light enters my eye. When I smell something, smell enters my nose. Now, when we're talking about sensory processing difficulties, there's also a few other senses that we relate to as well. These are our proprioceptive and vestibular senses, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about these in a second, but both of these are internal senses and they tell us what's happening inside of our body. Another sensory system that's become really big and really important at the moment is called interoception. And interoception basically tells us how we are feeling. So it tells us, are we hungry? Are we tired? Are we thirsty? But it also tells us, are we happy? Are we sad? Are we angry? And our body then helps us to piece all these little units of information together so that our brain can understand, I'm angry, I need the toilet. Interoception is massively important and hugely related also to emotional regulation. Now, I haven't got enough time today to talk to you too much about interoception, but please do look on our website, or we've got some online training specifically about interoception if you want to learn more about that. Today we're going to focus on those bottom 7 senses because they're the ones that are really, really important when we're starting to recognise and think about sensory processing difficulties. So I'm going to run through those 7 and just give you some insights and some tips developmentally as to what we need to look at for those senses in order to understand them the best that we can. So for hearing, the main thing I want you to remember about hearing is that we hear through vibration. So it doesn't have to be an obvious physical sound. It could be someone feeling a vibration. It could be a radiator humming. It could be a light buzzing because it's about to go out. We all have different frequencies in our voices as well. So frequency means the amount of vibrations. Men generally have a lower frequency voice. Females generally higher frequency voice. And so if we're thinking about people that might find it difficult to tune into certain sounds, you may well notice that some people listen or take in information better from a male versus a female, or the other way around. And that can be because of their voice, the way that they are speaking and the sound that they are creating. You may notice that some people find it difficult to adjust their voice when they come inside, when they've been playing outside. So they come inside and they're speaking just a little bit louder than they need to be. And you may notice that actually, even with your prompting, it makes no difference as to how they lower their voice. And that's because the way that we process sound outside is very different to the way we process sound inside. So for some people, it can just take a little bit longer in order to recognise the changes in how they're taking in that sound. Visual. Now, our visual sense is probably the one that goes through the most obvious developmental stages for us. So when we're born, we can see in contrast. So we're processing visual information essentially through black and white. So you will notice that lots of baby toys are black and white, and that's to help with that development. After we see in black and white, the first colour we process is red. And so again, lots of baby toys are black, white and red. Now, where I used to work, a lot of the young people loved red things. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was their favourite colour. However, now I understand, for many of them, it was their stage in development. So they're visually processing red things, but after that, finding it very difficult to understand the things around them. So after we're confident in red, seeing red, we then learn that our environment's 3D and physical. So we might spin, we might rotate objects. After that, we see the rest of the light spectrum, so blue and all of the other colours. Touch. Touch is known as our largest external sense. It's all of your skin, so it's all of the outside of your body, but it's also inside. So when you eat something that's cold, you can feel that it's going down inside of you and it's really cold. That's your tactile sense that's giving you that information. Now, there's 2 things I want you to remember about touch during the session. There's light touch and deep pressure. And both of these ways of feeling things are sensed differently. So light touch is when something might brush past the surface of your skin. So a feather or something that tickles, or labels in your clothes. When I receive light touch, the tactile receptors are right on the surface of my skin. And so all of them are stimulated really quickly. All of those messages travel up to my brain. And when my brain gets them, usually it tells me it's too much, get away from me. So when I'm being tickled, for example, I will get all of those messages, and all I want is for that person to get away from me because it's too much. Deep pressure, on the other hand, those tactile receptors are a lot deeper in the skin, so we really have to squeeze in order to feel that tactile input. And those deep pressure receptors, we know, are relating to be a lot more calming. So if you go for a massage, your body generally feels so much more relaxed after a massage than it does after you've been tickled. Okay, and then the last two external senses are taste and smell. Now, taste, there's 5 ways that we can taste: bitter, salty, sour, sweet, and umami. Umami is a Japanese word for something that's delicious. All of those tastes are detected in our brain. So when we eat something, those tiny little dots on our tongue, the food will dissolve into those dots. And those dots take messages up to the brain, and the brain tells us if it's bitter, salty, sour, sweet, or umami. Now, there's lots of misunderstandings about taste because we might judge a food by its texture. You've got the most amount of tactile receptors in your mouth. Or we might judge a food by its flavour. And for its flavour, we also need our sense of smell. So if you've ever had a really bad cold, or you've held your nose while you're eating something, you'll notice that you don't get the full flavour of that food because you need the air going down the back of your nose in order to get that flavour. So my nose, my sense of smell, is really, really important when we're talking about food choices and eating as well. Now, smell is processed in a different part of our brain. It's processed in the limbic part of our brain, which is also where we process emotions. Now, smell is one of the most common processing difficulties, but the hardest one for us to recognise. And that's probably because the way we respond to it or engage with it is in a very personal way. If I don't like a smell, I might not obviously do something about it. Socially, I may have learned just to sit there. Whereas for some of the people that we're supporting, we may notice that they physically refuse to go into a room, or they might gag when a smell is really overwhelming and really intense. Other people, if they're looking for smells, you might notice they go up and smell people. So they might put their nose in their neck or under their arm. Or you might notice that they lick things. And again, by licking something, I'm getting that smell input as well. So those are our 5 external senses. The 2 internal senses that I spoke about are proprioception. That tells us where our body is in space. So it's the feedback you get from your joints and your muscles. In regards to our development, we need our body awareness, that proprioceptive input, that resistance, to understand imitation. So if I'm holding a baby, I'm looking at that baby, I'm pulling silly faces at that baby. For that baby to pull them back to me, they need to know how to use their joints and their muscles on their face. Construction. Say I'm going to make a tower of bricks. I need to know how firmly to hold that brick so I don't break it, but also I don't drop it. And also when I position that brick, I need to know where to locate that object so that I can stack it up. So I need to be aware of where my body is in relationship to that object. And then motor planning. It may well be as I'm walking through a doorway, I bump into the side of the door. Or as I'm walking down a corridor, I'm trailing my fingers along the wall, because actually that helps me to know where my body is in relationship to that wall. So my proprioceptive input is my body awareness. It's the feedback from my joints and my muscles to tell me where I am. So you might have clapping, pushing, banging, stomping, bumping into things. All of those characteristics relate to body awareness. And the vestibular input, the other internal sensory system, is our sense of movement in relationship with gravity. So if I was to ask you to spin around in loads of circles and walk in a straight line, you'd probably find that a little bit difficult to do because you're still feeling a little bit spinny. Some people you support may well be able to spin all day and not feel dizzy, so they can then stand up and walk away. Now, our vestibular sense is modulated between our ears. So between our ears, we have fluid that moves. Anytime that fluid moves, we're getting movement input. So if someone's rocking backwards and forwards, if they're jumping up and down, if they're spinning round and round, those are all different ways that they can get in vestibular input. Now, because of where that fluid is, it's also impacted by our hearing. So if you have someone who has regular ear infections or auditory difficulties, it's highly likely their sense of movement and balance is impacted as well. In the same way, it can impact your visual processing. So if you imagine, if you're feeling really dizzy and spinny, one of the first things you might do is to hold on to something and close your eyes. And when you do that, that then helps you to feel less dizzy. So for some people that we support, you may notice that they squint as they walk around. Or as they get into a vehicle, they might prefer not to sit on the seat and prefer to sit on the floor. Because when that vehicle is moving forward, everything that's whizzing past in the windows is too much, too overwhelming. So by blocking that out, makes them feel a lot more in control of that movement that they're feeling. So we need all of these 7 senses to process and to constantly help us to understand what's going on around us. From before we're born, we're actually processing most of these senses, but from the moment we're born, all of these connections are starting to make sense and be understood in our brain. Our brain is then telling us what to do with that information. So in our brain, we create something called a pathway. So when I get some visual information, that visual information travels to my brain and creates a path. Every time I then experience visual input, that pathway becomes a little bit more solid, becomes stronger, because I'm getting more experiences from it. So that's why we say, as a child, it's so important for our senses to be stimulated, so we can get all of that sensory input that we need in order to understand it. We need all of our senses to work together so that we can start to develop skills. So if you imagine as a baby, I see things, I hear things, I smell things, but I need all of those senses to then start to piece together for me to then start to be able to reach out and pick something up, or to be able to support my body, or to be able to track something. This is something called the pyramid of learning, and it's a really great visual tool in order to help us to understand the importance of our senses for development. So let me just briefly explain what it is. You can see right at the bottom of this pyramid, it says central nervous system. That's how all of these messages travel through your body. It's your spine and your brain. On top of there, you've got your 2 internal senses. You've got proprioception, vestibular, and your largest external sense, which is touch, tactile. On top of there, you've got olfactory, which is smell, visual, which is sight, auditory, which is hearing, and gustatory, which is taste. So the base of that pyramid now is your 7 senses. As you move up the pyramid, you see in the colour blocks certain skills, stages of development that we learn. So like I said, motor planning, awareness of 2 sides of my body, auditory language skills, visual spatial perception. I need my senses right at the bottom of that pyramid to be working together in order for me to be able to do these things. If I have difficulties with my visual processing, for example, I'm going to have difficulties with all of these things above it. So I need to find ways of supporting my visual processing so the base of that pyramid is solid, so then the things that are above it are solid as well. Right at the top of this pyramid, it says academic learning. That's based on your average 4 or 5-year-old child when they go to school. Mainstream curriculums are based on that pyramid being set, and we can carry on learning above it. So if someone has a sensory processing difficulty, it can mean that those blocks at the bottom of the pyramid may well have a little chip. They may well need filling in, a little bit of extra support in order to be able to do those things above it. Okay, so what is a sensory processing difficulty? My definition of a sensory processing difficulty is when our brain finds it difficult to do its most important job. And my brain's job is to organise and interpret the information it receives. So the information that come in from my senses, my brain then needs to understand that and tell me what to do. It needs to help me make that meaningful. Now, for most of us, we're doing that on a day-to-day basis. For people with sensory processing difficulties, they're taking in those sounds, but when their brain gets those sounds, it may well be finding it difficult to say, that's an important sound, that's not an important sound. That's a quiet sound, that's a loud sound. And so for some people, discriminating, working out which is the important sound and which isn't, can be really difficult. So they may well be hearing the radiator buzzing or the light buzzing, and their brain is telling them that's important. Whereas the sound of the teacher's voice or the sound of mum's voice may well be less likely, less priority from their brain. So we know that SPD impacts 1 in 20. Research says that, children and adults. Research also says that over 75% of autistic people. Now this statistic is difficult because actually we can never get every autistic person to take part in research. And so what I like to interpret from this is that it is a high percentage of autistic people. Sensory Spectacle work with autistic people to create our immersive learning environments. That's how we educate about SPD in the community. And so some of those people are autistic, and they would say 100% of autistic people have sensory processing difficulties. It will vary from person to person how much it impacts their daily living and quality of life. We know that there's some autistic people living independently who are able to manage their sensory processing better. We also know there's many autistic people that require extra support in order to function in everyday life. So it can vary from person to person. However, we also know that SPD impacts many other people. Some people without a diagnosis, as well as some people with diagnoses like ADHD, Fragile X, fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, epilepsy, Down syndrome, so many other people. So it's not just autistic people. It's really important to remember that there may well be other people in your classroom or in your care setting that have difficulties in organising the sensory information they receive. The way we recognise these difficulties is generally through sensory characteristics. Now, I prefer to use that term over behaviours because there's a reason behind that person doing that thing, that characteristic. We're going to have a little look now into what sensory processing difficulties can be. So there's 3 main ways we can recognise difficulties. So it might be that someone has difficulties with modulation. Modulation means the amount of sensory input they're processing. So it could be that someone seeks out sensory input, so they seek out visual input or auditory input. It might be that they avoid sensory input. So they're covering their ears, they're covering their eyes, they're avoiding clothing, maybe they're taking their clothing off. Some people may have difficulties with discrimination. Discrimination can mean that they find it difficult to locate where a sensations come from. So someone may say someone's name, and that person may not look towards them or know that that sound has come from that person or that place. It can take a little bit longer just to locate where that sound has come from. In the same way, if you were to put an object in someone's hand, they might not do something with it straight away. They might not squeeze it, hold it, throw it, squid it, because actually it takes just a little bit longer for them to work out where that sensation has come from. Discrimination also largely relates to our proprioceptive sense. So for people who find it difficult to recognize where their body is, know how much force and pressure to use. So they might be that person that always gives you that big bear hug, or they always close and they always slam the door when they close the door. That's discrimination difficulties. And then there are sensory motor based difficulties, and this is generally where we'll see a dyspraxia diagnosis. So it's difficulties maybe maintaining posture or planning and executing movements and actions within our body. So largely relating to our coordination and balance. People with a dyspraxia diagnosis describe themselves maybe as feeling clumsy, and so knowing how much force and pressure to use, but also knowing how to support their own posture is really important as well. So these are the three categories that we can recognize SPD by, and most of the time when we're initially looking at sensory characteristics, we will identify the modulation difficulties. So the seeking and avoiding characteristics, and craving. Craving is where you see someone doing a sensory activity, sensory thing, but it doesn't necessarily meet a need. So they could be doing that thing all day without feeling exhausted or feeling like they receive enough of it. That's really important for us to recognize. Once we're confident in recognizing modulation difficulties, we'll naturally start to think, oh, you know what, actually, maybe that's discrimination. Maybe that's the fact they find it difficult to locate where that sensation's come from. So it might be words on a page, it might be sounds in a room, whatever sensory system it might be. So when we're thinking about supporting people with sensory processing difficulties, we may well notice these sensory characteristics in a very obvious way because it's different to other people. So they may well be chewing on things, they may well be finding it difficult to sit still, they may well be walking on their tiptoes, they may well be flapping. However, there's also some really, really important positives that we should remember. So when we're supporting children or adults, some personality traits that can relate to people with SPD that are positive are the fact that they've got an incredible attention to detail. They will notice that change or that thing that is different because for them, their body detects it really quickly. They generally have a good deep concentration, so they'll be engaged in something if it's motivating, if it's engaging for them. We know lots of people have jobs in computing and coding because they're able to recognize those errors in patterns, finding solutions, innovative. All of those are skills that we need within the tech industry. And being creative, determined, committed, and a problem solver. These are just natural personalities that people with SPD need. Their environment is constantly changing. Therefore, the sensory input is constantly changing. So they need to be able to be creative, determined, committed, and a problem solver in order to be able to respond to the different sensory elements that they're processing. So although we're thinking about and recognizing these sensory characteristics that might be different, it's really important to remember, actually, we are all individuals and there's positives that we need to make sure that we emphasize within people with SPD as well. So I'm going to run through each of the senses and help to highlight to you some of the characteristics you may recognize relating to each of these senses. And then I'm going to give you an activity where we're becoming that sensory detective. Okay. So for sound and vision, we may know that someone finds it difficult to screen out irrelevant sound or visual input. Therefore, classrooms, small environments are going to be really difficult. You've got things that are constantly changing, whether that's sound or visual input. Someone may well seem like the loudest person in the room and also be covering their ears. Someone may be attracted to lights or to windows or rotating objects, or notice as soon as anyone passes past the window. On the opposite side, we may well also notice that some people are in pain. So bright lights may well be painful for some people who are really sensitive to light. So you may see closing of eyes or pushing on temples because that pain threshold has been stimulated. Touch, tactile input. We know that someone may be tactile defensive, so only wear certain types of clothing. So going back to the labels and seams. Some people may overreact, so it may well be that someone just brushes past them in the corridor, but that person gives them a big push. Because for them, brushing past them, that light touch actually created that pain. And so their body's response has been to send them into fight and flight because their brains got all of those messages from the light touch and told them it's too much to protect themselves. Get away from me. Some people may seek small spaces, so they might love to be under a table, standing in the corner of the room, having a big squeeze or a big hug. Some people may pinch, they might pinch themselves, they might squeeze themselves, they might bite themselves, but they might also do that to you. I get tactile information from myself, but I also get tactile information from you as well because I get it from my skin. And we've also got the most amount of tactile receptors in our mouth, so I may well pick things up and put them in my mouth and chew them because actually that's a really quick way I can get lots of tactile input. Smell and taste. You might have people that smell everything. So like I said, they come up to you and they smell your neck, smell your perfume, smell your hair. You might have people that gag quite easily. So it may be that you walk into a room or you put a food in front of them and you notice that reflex, that reflux, gagging. You may notice people lick things, so they lick objects, they lick windows, they lick metal, they lick tables. That can be for smell. And you may well notice that some people eat a small selection of food. Now, eating and food is a huge topic. I'd usually have a whole day or more relating to that, and I would never start with supporting just someone's eating. It's really important that we recognise all of the other sensory elements first and go back to the food. So for example, you might know someone who eats crunchy, dry, beige foods, breadsticks, toast, crisps. You really can't get them to eat vegetables. Now, when I eat those crunchy, dry foods, I'm creating a lot of sound. I'm chewing that food and my ear is right next to my jaw, so I'm making lots of sound when I'm chewing on that food. If I then try and give them a boiled carrot or a pea, when I eat that, I don't create any sound. So if it's relating to auditory as to why they're eating those crunchy food, may try a vegetable that is crunchy. So a raw carrot, when you chew on that, that's going to be creating a lot more sound. So we need to recognise the overriding sensory needs first and then come back to looking at the other challenges that may well come ahead relating from why they're only eating the foods that they're eating. Okay, vestibular, we know that some people may well be constantly moving, especially their head though. So that's where the vestibular input's from. So wiggling in their seat, standing up, sitting down, spinning around, sitting in strange positions. It might be that they crouch on their seat or crouch on the toilet. They may bang their head, so they might use their hand, they might use an object, they might bang their head against something. And then on the opposite side, if someone's processing too much vestibular input, they may well seem really dizzy or reluctant to join in activities. So it might be that they're sitting down, you said to them, come on, stand up, we're going to go and have our lunch. However, they don't get up straight away. They get up in their own time. And what happens then is that that person knows if they were to stand up straight away and follow, they'd feel really dizzy, really overwhelmed because of all that movement. They're sitting there for a bit longer because they're trying to regulate, they're trying to organise, process what it is that they're going to do so that when they stand up, they don't get overwhelmed with that movement. And then proprioception. We might have people that are constantly touching things around them. So if you're in the classroom or at your home, poking things, squeezing things, pushing things, climbing on things, rocking, bouncing, spinning, seeming heavy-handed, so rough and tumble, playing around, bumping into things, anything where they can feel their body. They may also be a tiptoe walker, and they may also headbang. So those are some of the characteristics that we may recognise relating to sensory processing difficulties for each of those senses. Now, terminology-wise, if we were to go into a professional meeting, it's really important for us to know some of the terms to use. So if we're thinking about modulation difficulties, if someone is an avoider, they're known as being hypersensitive. That means it's too much. So that sound is too much. I'm going to cover my ears and avoid it. Okay? If I'm known as being a seeker, I'm looking out for more information. I'm known as being hyposensitive. So hyper is when I'm avoiding and hypo is when I'm seeking. So we're going to look at just 3 sensory characteristics and break them down. And this is where we're becoming that sensory detective. It's an activity that you can easily do in each of your settings. And so then you can really understand the person you're supporting just that little bit better, so you can personalize their care too. So holding my hands over my ears. The sensory system that relates to is my auditory sense. Am I doing that because I'm avoiding, I'm hypersensitive, or am I seeking, am I hypo? Well, if I'm covering my ears, I'd say that I'm avoiding, so I'm hypersensitive. Avoiding getting messy. Now, this is where I want you to think about all of the senses that could possibly be related to it. It could be the way that it feels, so the tactile element. It could be the way that it smells. So you might be doing a certain messy activity and it smells a certain way. It could be the fact that when you make a mess, you make a big visual mess too. And so for many people, that's too overwhelming. And it could be proprioception. So it could be the way that your body is when you're getting messy. So imagine how you walk in wellies before they get really muddy. When they're muddy, you really have to pick up and use your muscles a lot more, don't you? So if I'm avoiding getting messy, am I hyper or hypo? I'm hyper. So it's too much. I'm avoiding it again. Okay, then the last one on here is walking on tiptoes. And this is where we start to consider that some sensory characteristics can be for very different reasons. So if I'm walking on tiptoes, it could be my tactile sense, because I'm feeling that surface on the bottom of my foot. It could be my proprioceptive, the way that my body feels. And it could be my vestibular, so my sense of balance. Because when I'm on my tiptoes, my balance is slightly off, isn't it? Now, when I'm seeking or avoiding, this is where different senses could be for different reasons. So for tactile, if my foot is flat on the ground and I go onto my tiptoes, I'm now avoiding that tactile input. So for tactile, I'm hypersensitive. Now for proprioception and vestibular, it's slightly different, because when I go onto my tiptoes, I'm now actually getting more feedback from my body awareness and movement. Because when I'm on my tiptoes, I'm feeling all of my body, but also my sense of balance is stimulated because I'm wobbly, I'm on my tiptoes. So for tactile, I'm hypersensitive, but proprioception and vestibular, I'm hypo. So like I said, it's really important that you personalize the purpose why the person you're supporting, whether it's your child or a student, is doing the thing that they're doing. You need to think about all of the senses that it could relate to. And so for that student, are they sensitive to tactile input? Do they seek out tactile input? Now, if you notice someone who seeks and avoids sensory input throughout their day, that's actually a really positive thing. The way I explain this, that purple line is you throughout your everyday life. We can do something to support ourselves, regulate ourselves, keep ourselves feeling a relatively constant way. If someone's hypersensitive, they're way above that line. They're sensing loads of sensory input. And so when they're hypersensitive, they're doing something to try and get back down to that line. So if I'm hypersensitive to sound, I'm hearing all of these sounds in my environment. When I cover my ears, me covering my ears or speaking really loudly at the same time is what's bringing me back down. It's regulating that auditory input. When I'm hyposensitive, I'm way below that line. And so what I'm doing, I'm seeking out sensory input to get up to that line. So I'm seeking out visual input, I'm seeking out sound, I'm seeking out body awareness. So if you notice this wavy line, like I said, actually, it's a really positive thing because it means the person you're supporting is aware that they need something and they avoid it, and they need it and they avoid it. Our job is to try and help them to stay nearer that purple line as much as possible. So there's less of these waves. So there's more of a constant flow of sensory support. Now, you may well have noticed in your pyramid that I showed you earlier on in the training, there's a block near the top called behaviour. Unfortunately, many sensory characteristics are misunderstood as negative behaviours. So it's really important that we take the sensory characteristics, so whether that's squeezing something, whether that's licking something, and we support it as a sensory need. If we don't have those blocks at the bottom that are solid and filled in, we'll find it very difficult to do the things above it. So it can't be a behaviour in a negative way. We need to recognise it as a sensory need and support it in that way. So supporting the senses, just some initial ways that you can start to support each of the senses. Things that are to avoid, things like hats are great, dark spaces, ear defenders, weighted lap pads. Things to help seek out sensory input, mirrors, music, white noise, weighted items, massages. Loads of physical input, trampoline, space hoppers. So things to consider. Identify the most impactful sensation. So what sensory system is it that really impacts that child or young person you're supporting? Once you know that, you're naturally ready to support them in all environments. Try using weighted things, try using straws or drinks bottles. Think about smells. Think about your own smell. So shampoo, shower gel, washing detergents, especially if you have someone that licks things. Try and reduce those smells if you can. Think about your clothing. Can you wear something that's neutral and not patterned if you've got someone who's visually distracted easily? Turn off technology if you're not using it. Technology creates a lot of sound, a lot of vibrations without us necessarily hearing it. But for people who are sensitive to sound, they are hearing it. Think about visual information and just be prepared. Have some sort of resource where you've got some sensory support items there ready to support the young person that you're with. So I hope you found that helpful. Whirlwind into becoming a sensory detective. Like I said, lots more information is available on our website. We've also got information of our online training on our website. Lots of courses on there, whether you are a parent or a professional. And we've also got lots of books as well to help you learn even more about sensory processing difficulties. So please do get in touch. My name was Becky, and I hope you have a lovely day. Take care.
Hey, it's Ian here at Studio TV. Thank you so much for joining us here at Getting It Right for Me Live. Let me ask you a really quick question. Are you here because you are hoping to develop your skills and your knowledge and all your learning and understanding around supporting and caring for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities? I assume that's what you've come here for. We hope that you're enjoying your time here with us. There's some amazing people, and we're so grateful for them coming and being part of this. And we're so grateful for you to be joining us as well. There's a couple of things I just really quickly wanted to introduce you to. First of all, don't forget that you can upgrade your ticket at any time to one of the paid tickets, which we try to keep the price as low as we possibly can, just to cover what we need to help out the speakers a little bit and make sure this event is as good as it can be. What that means is you can access the live Q&A sessions that we're running throughout the event, and you can access all the sessions for up to a year afterwards if you buy one of those paid tickets. Check out the whole school ones. How that works is if you book a whole school ticket, and you can pay online or you can drop us a line and we'll issue an invoice and we'll sort it all out. That's absolutely fine. But we'll then make it possible for all your staff to be able to access all the sessions here at Getting It Right for Me Live this year. So do hope that's helpful. The other thing I want to mention is, and there are lots of members joining us this week, so thank you so much to those of you who are members, but we have put together, if you're looking to go deeper and access ongoing support and help and training, either as an individual, as a parent, as a professional supporting someone with additional needs, in a school or educational setting, or from a professional point of view, we have put together here at Studio TV with Lynn McCann and her team at Reach Out ASC a fantastic membership that starts at just £10 a month and includes a wide range of courses to help you support those in your care. There's a load of resources and tools, printable things that you can use to work with those children, support them. And there's more content being added all the time. One of my favorite parts of the membership is there is a peer group community that's built into that. So you can ask questions of Lynn and her team and your peers, built right into that membership as well. As I say, it starts at just £10 a month. Whole school memberships are there. We're offering trust-wide memberships, and local authorities have started to get in touch and offer this to their staff across a range of schools as well. We would love for you to join our community. If you've got any questions on that, drop us a line, but very much hope to see you there. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the event.